Graveyard shift workers of Reddit, what crazy, creepy, unbelievable things have you seen working in the dead of the night? Story 1. I worked at a campground on night shift, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. every night. It wasn't bad. I would bring in my PS2 and game a good portion of the night, only having to deal with 1 or 2 people on busy nights. It was just me in this little 8x8 shack with nothing around but dark all night. My first week there, the other third shift guy who was quitting told me about this payphone a few feet from the shack where I worked. He said it rang every night at 4:17 a.m. just once. It was probably just an automated test call, he guessed. He's never answered it himself. I go for a few months with the job. It was just middle of summer, so most nights I had the windows closed so I couldn't hear the payphone go off. Mid-August, I started leaving the windows open during the night. Sure enough, at 4:17 a.m. every morning, the phone would ring once. The ring even sounded creepy, like the payphone was submerged in water, then put where it sat. One night, I got up the nerve to answer it. I set an alarm at 4:15 and would go wait at the payphone until it rang. When it did, I answered it. But there was no sound, just dead air, like someone was on the other line but wasn't saying anything. I said hello a few more times and hung up. I did this every night for a week with the same result. I didn't think anything of it and left it alone after that for about a month. The first week of October, I decided to answer the phone once again. I set my alarm, and when the time came, I answered the phone. Hello? Hello? Then, I heard what sounded like someone inhaling through clenched teeth. The voice that responded was rough and sounded like he had gargled gravel. The best comparison I can give is Horace P. Gage from The Suffering. He said my name, my complete name, first, middle, and last. It was a voice I'd never heard. My voice caught in my throat and I hung up. I rattled some change to the payphone and hit star 69. The number had come from California. I live in Indiana. Story 2. I work as a transporter in a hospital. About 2 years ago, we moved from the old city hospital into a new state-of-the-art facility. The old hospital was built in the 1930s and was showing its age. And at night, it was just plain creepy. Each floor had an east wing and west wing. The east wing on the 4th floor was the first wing to be shut down about 2 weeks before the move. One night, at around 9:30, I'm up on the floor to get a patient from the west wing. I see a small group of nurses and aides who all used to work on the now closed east wing. They looked visibly shaken. I walked over to see if everything was okay. They told me that they had just decided to walk through their old wing for nostalgia's sake. When they were over there, the phone at the nurse's station started ringing. The computers and phones had not yet been moved. Not sure what to do, one of the nurses reached over the counter and answered the phone. The nurse told me there was a woman's voice on the other end and that she sounded confused. This is the conversation, as best as I can remember it. "This is Nurse Bailey. How can I help you?" asked the nurse.
Hello? Who is this?
"This is Bailey. I'm a nurse. Is there anything I can help you with?"
Where am I?
"This is our hospital name. Are you a patient here?"
Oh, okay.
Then the line went dead. That's when the nurse finally looked at the screen on the phone to see where the call was coming from. The phone gave the room number directly next to the nurse's station. The rooms by this point had all been cleared out and the phones removed. They could easily see into that room and see that there was nobody in there. And that's when they bolted towards the west wing, where I was getting off the elevator. I avoided that wing for the rest of my time there. My mother started working at the hospital right out of college. It was the only job she had ever known. On moving day, she was determined to walk through every hallway before leaving for the last time. She had her camera and was taking pictures as she went. On one of the empty patient wings, she stopped and was getting ready to take a picture when the door on the room right next to her slammed shut, as though someone on the other side had thrown the door as hard as they could. My mom decided she was done taking pictures. And this happened to me just last Friday. It was going on 10, and I was taking my last patient back to her room. She was a little old lady who was stable enough to ride in a wheelchair, but definitely needed assistance on her feet. I got her back to her room and helped her into bed. I made sure she was comfortable and set the bed alarm before turning out the lights and leaving her room. I pulled the curtain behind me so as to not let too much light in, but not all the way so that I could still see her in her bed from the hallway. Her nurse was in the next room, and I needed to speak with her. While I was standing there, waiting for the nurse to come out of the other room, I distinctly saw a person walk past the curtain inside the old woman's room. The person was about the same height as the woman and had the same gray hair. At first I thought she shouldn't be up walking around. Then I remembered the bed alarm was set. The room was totally silent, and when I looked in, I could see her still laying there, exactly where I had left her. She had not moved an inch, and the bed alarm was still armed. That's when I got the most intense full-body chills of my life. The nurse came out of the other room, I gave her my message, and then booked it out of there. Story 3. My physics professor was a very intelligent man, nearing retirement. He was very well read, talked about interesting topics, and encouraged objective thinking. He was also very dedicated. In our state, teachers that do not take sick days are rewarded when they retire, and he imparted to me once that he'd be sitting on a boatload of cash when he was finally done, because he hadn't missed a day in 20 years. He also had a penchant for telling us about his experiences in life. In one of the stories he shared with us, he was tending to his garden in his backyard when a large, man-shaped black figure appeared. It stood there and stared at him, and didn't respond to any attempts at communication. He told us that it was not the first time the figure had appeared to him, coldly observing him and disappearing. After I graduated, I took to writing short stories and wanted to write one based on the dark figure. I tried to contact him through several means: a phone number on an old syllabus, Facebook, one of his colleagues, and the email address listed on his website. I finally found out a year ago from the former dean of students that he disappeared midway through the final semester before his retirement, and no one had seen or heard from him since. There was a post on the Facebook wall of our old discussion hall club, which I only stumbled across recently, a club that he used to moderate. Apparently, an electrician died fixing one of the overhead light fixtures in the same room where our professor had held his lessons. Cause of death was electrocution after both hands completed a circuit and knocked out the breaker. The thread had about 40 comments debating the legitimacy of claims by some of the students that a large black figure had been seen out of the corner of their vision before the lights went out, knocking the electrician's ladder out from underneath him. Story 4. I used to work in a 411 office as an escalation specialist on the night shift, meaning I talked to all the crazy night callers that were too crazy for regular reps to handle. It paid really good, but I talked to a lot of people with real issues on a regular basis. One caller sticks out in particular. This one guy from rural eastern Kentucky used to get extremely drunk and call looking for the number for Jonathan Taylor Thomas. This was back in 2002. The man called probably 100 times a night, picking random states and methodically getting numbers for any Jonathan Thomas he could find. Well, he got escalated to me a lot, especially during the early morning hours when he got the drunkest. One night, he said, "I got Jonathan Taylor Thomas a birthday present. Do you want to know what it is?" My mind instantly raced frantically to the dark places man's dare not dread. Cat skulls? Baby arms? Pillowcases full of pubic hair? He got Jonathan Taylor Thomas an engraved pocket knife? I think my nose bled. We figured out his monthly phone bill, based on 411 calls alone, was in excess of $5,000. Eventually, he stopped calling. Probably because he was horribly in debt with his phone bill. Jonathan Taylor Thomas, if you're reading this, I pray that man either got in touch with you or didn't, whichever is best for everyone's sanity. Story 5. This is kind of a sort of paranormal story, but it's mostly a weird feelings you get in the dead of the night kind of thing. I used to deliver for Papa John's during the late closing shift. The people were actually pretty fun to work with, and the tips were surprisingly not bad. One night, around 1 a.m., I made a delivery to a nursing home. A few of the nurses working the graveyard shift ordered a pizza. When I got there, I called the nurses station and they buzzed me in. But the station was way in the back of the nursing home. So I had to walk all the way through the length of the place. I passed up the rooms where people were sleeping. Some were watching TV, some were just dozing. There was one old lady who I'd caught a glimpse of in her room. She was tiny. She looked almost minuscule and withered in her bed. To me, it looked like she was in some kind of cocoon. At that point, I felt some kind of force or presence or something like that. I know it sounds insane, but I think I felt the presence of death itself in that nursing home. I never really bothered to check up, and I'm not sure how I'd confirm it now, but I think that lady had died that night, and I was witnessing it. I think I passed to death in the halls of that nursing home while delivering pizzas. Not death as some kind of bony Grim Reaper personification, but death as an impersonal force. The air felt heavy in some kind of way, and old and musty. People sometimes say that when they sense death, they feel some kind of cold. I didn't feel cold, but it just felt like, sort of like being in a room full of old clocks, and each clock was winding down. I felt like everything was winding down and slowing down and just nearing its end. And that's what death felt like to me in the hall of that nursing home that night. Like everything was winding down. Story 6. I worked in a residential facility for troubled youth, basically a juvenile detention center, on the night shift. It has been in existence for almost 100 years. Originally an orphanage run by nuns, and there are plenty of spooky events that have taken place over the years. Missing kids and staff, fires, etc. Lots of ghosts supposedly inhabit the building. I'm an atheist, don't believe in that nonsense, but I saw something I can't explain. About a year ago, I saw a kid down a hallway wearing an orange shirt at around 2 a.m. Assuming I had a runner, I turned, grabbed my radio, and told the others to check their residence. When I turned back, the kid was gone. All kids were accounted for, which was a bit surprising. When I described the kid to the others that night, the ones who had worked in that place longer than they said it was just Eli, a boy who died back in the 70s during a barn fire. They never found his body, so maybe he used the fire as a means of covering his escape? Of course this was crap. I was just tired, or whatever. But a few weeks later, I was cleaning out a room that was going to be used as a new classroom and found some old pictures. One portrait in particular looked familiar. Sounds like it's out of a horror movie, but I flipped the picture over. Eli Jameson. Dang. I know it was just a coincidence or my mind playing tricks, but still. Yeah, I just want to pause here to point out how much that person is in denial. But anyway, back to the stories. Story 7? I used to be an LPN on a cardiac floor. We had a corner room on the unit, which was bigger than any other room. This is usually where we placed the patients who were on their way out, as it had a nicer view. It was quieter, and much more room for the family during the last hours. We had an 89-year-old CHF patient. Nothing out of the ordinary. Came in for chest pain, was on hospice, and the family expected her to pass within a week or so. She had difficulty breathing, but used what breath she had left to talk to us. She had 3 Pomeranians and always wore a bright fuchsia robe, even when she was in bed. She had bright blue nail polish on too. So, one evening, when I came in for a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, I'm getting report, and she's not doing so well. The family's there, and she'd been floating in and out of consciousness all day. We expected her to pass that night and took extra care to check on her, to make her comfortable. At around 12:30 a.m., she passed. The floor knew her as a regular patient, so many of us were sad. I went in to do her post-mortem care after the family leaves, at about 1:30 a.m. or so. I took extra special care, removing her PICC line and dressings very carefully, cleaned her up very nicely, and the morgue staff comes to take her down. We got an admission around 2 a.m., normal chest pain with cardiac history, bearded man in his mid-50s, looked kind of rough but pleasant, and was admitted to the big room where the previous patient passed. He didn't offer much during his history and EKG until I noticed he kept looking over my shoulder near the seat by the window. He did this a few times until I asked what was wrong, and he asked me why an old woman was sitting on the cushion. I turned around and saw no one. He kept interrupting me during his admission history to assert that there was someone there with a hot pink robe on, short with curly hair. When he said hot pink robe, my hair on my arms immediately raised up. He started laughing, thinking it was a side effect of some meds he got in the ER, saying she had 3 dogs with her. They were small and poofy. I showed him a picture of a few small dogs on my phone, and he immediately pointed out a picture of a Pomeranian. Our rooms are monitored with camera and sound, so at this point the charge nurse came in and sat next to me, just watching him. He told us the woman was smiling, stood up and walked over to us, placed her hands on our shoulders, and kept smiling. I didn't feel anything, and at this point the patient was becoming very nervous. There was no way he could have known. The family had taken her pink robe in a dark bag with them when they left, and they left the exit on the other side of the building from the ER. She finally left around 6 a.m., and he requested to move to another room because she was just sitting there with her dogs. We've had a few incidents like that, and the night manager refused to go near that side of our unit unless there was an emergency. Last story. One morning at 2 a.m. on maybe my 3rd week on the job, I'm walking back from my apartment, took a quick snack break, back to my office, which wasn't far. At this time of night, I would usually be in the truck, patrolling, and not being in the truck was mistake number 1. We were not classified as armed security guards, meaning no firearms. But we did carry extendable batons, which in my state, you need to be licensed to carry and use. I, being somewhat stupid, had mine anyway, though I was not licensed yet. My logic was I would rather use it and get an assault charge than not have it and possibly get stabbed, which was very careless, I know. As I'm walking back, I see what is pretty obviously a drunk man stumbling in my direction. Shaking down the jitters, this was my first real encounter, I go to talk to the man to escort him off the campus, which is generally no big deal, as 90% of the time drunk people just want to get home and aren't looking for trouble. This guy apparently was. He immediately gets belligerent with me and starts screaming at me. I maintained my distance, but he began advancing on me, fists raised. On instinct, I grabbed the baton and extended it. Luckily for me, hitting him could have gotten me fired if not arrested. I realized I shouldn't swing at him. And for some reason, I still do not exactly understand, I pointed the baton at him and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Expelliarmus!" Belligerent man stopped in his tracks, turned around, and walked off of campus. Never saw him again. TLDR, night security successfully disarmed a bellicose drunk man. Still waiting on my Hogwarts letter. Thank you for listening to the end. This one was kind of a mix of serious, really creepy stories and then some kind of humorous ones, especially the last one. I like a good balance though. I really enjoyed those stories and I hope you did too. If you did, please leave a like, and if you subscribe, I will literally squee. If you have any stories you'd like to share, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I obviously am a sucker for good stories. As always, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or add me on Steam if you'd like to game together. It's Misreadit for both of those. Yeah, I hope you have a really good day today. You deserve it.